Chances are you're familiar with DC's legendary comic series Watchmen, at least in name. It's one of the most famous graphic novels of all time and remains a hot-button subject for even 30 years after its original release. So before we get started, consider this your spoiler warning. We're gonna go in depth with episode 1 here, and if you haven't seen it, or if you haven't read the original comics, come back later.
Right, we're gonna get into all that stuff. Okay, so episode 1 opens in a movie theater, and I thought it was kind of an interesting opening, but you uncovered some history here.
Yeah, it opens with a kid watching a silent movie about a man named Bass Reeves, who was a real person in actual American history. He was the first Black U.S. Marshal. He was credited with over 3,000 arrests. And you want to actually pay really, really close attention to Reeves here when he's introduced kind of on the screen, because he's really styled in a way that like immediately pinged my memory of a Watchmen thing, which is an original Minuteman named Hooded Justice. I don't know, did you notice that at all? Like, yeah.
My question about this, like with the knowledge that he was real, was there like silent movies about him?
No.
Like he wasn't like a
No,
movie?
he's a bit of a folk hero as far as I've been able to tell, but as far as I found, the only like movies about him so far have been like modern, like historic. I think Morgan Freeman like narrated him, or like was there was some like a big name star did some.
Let's fact check that.
Bass Reeves, yeah. But the reason things kind of go to hell immediately after that, and it's because the Tulsa race massacre, or the Tulsa race riots of 1921.
So I'm ashamed to say that I was not aware of this.
I wasn't either.
Terrible chapter in history. I'm not like a big history person. I spend most of my time watching movies and playing video games. But yeah, the Tulsa race massacre was a very real part of U.S. history. An army of white supremacists stormed Tulsa's, the street that was known as the Black Wall Street. It was like a thriving Black community with basically military force. Like they were dropping there were like planes. What you see in this episode like really happened, and it's known as the single most horrific instances of racial violence in U.S. history.
Yeah, it's still actually being investigated today. Like there, like as of 2019, there are still like ongoing searches for mass graves, and it's this horrifying thing that happened that is not really covered in a lot of curriculums in schools. Yeah,
wonder why. So what did you think of that as like a way to open? Because Watchmen has always been about, lots of different issues, but it hasn't really been about race as much. So that seemed to me like it's setting the tone for, and then based on, the rest of this episode, it seems like it's setting the tone for what the series is gonna.
Yeah, I thought it was really interesting because, I mean, it's set in this alternate history, but it's set way before the events of the comic. So as far as we can tell, the 1921 opening is this exact same as our 1921, with the exception of like, the movie is not real, but like there's no major deviance between.
That's interesting, yeah. So where is the point in Watchmen history where it would diverge with our history?
I think the point is in the 40s, in the Minutemen. So like when superheroes start actually becoming a thing in Watchmen's America is when things very rapidly split into the alternate history versus our history. Which is it's an interesting choice that they decided to start it so far early. And I think it was really cool and also like really shocking. So
definitely, it was crazy to see. So then we jumped to the more or less, the present day, and I thought it was interesting that our first look at the present day world of Watchmen is this battery-powered pickup truck. Like it's a small touch, but like you would never see that.
It's such a small detail.
Right, in real life. But so it's like another way that that history in the world of Watchmen has diverged.
Something has changed dramatically between then and now in this alternate history as far as like our relationship with fossil fuels is concerned, because like they very specifically make a point of showing this guy's dash and like his battery gauge and like his
it's just like an interesting bit of like world building, and there's like so much of that throughout the episode. We're gonna try to point out most of it.
There's a lot of the world building in this universe happens that way, and they're actually just released like their PDFs online, the Paytonpedia or Peteypedia. The Peteypedia.
Yeah, so we'll put a link to this somewhere. Yeah. But HBO is like, I guess it seems like maybe week to week they're gonna be publishing these like documents full of Easter eggs, full of stuff. Like we wrote about it on GameSpot.com, like full of details about things that have happened in between the comics and the show. And one of those things was basically like a technology ban.
Right.
Because of suspicion over like Dr. Manhattan.
Right, yeah. So like if and the comics end with this horrific attack with, squids, in New York, and all these people die. And I didn't really think about it until now that like, oh, of course, it happened in 1985 in the comic. So naturally, that's like the dawn of personal computing. That's like the dawn of like public internet.
Right.
So that suspicion immediately like, oh.
So they would be blaming those things.
Right.
And the technology ban is the reason why, like in this show, for example, nobody has cell phones.
Right.
Stuff like that.
Yeah, and everything is battery powered. And
See, my question for you
Yep.
is, do you think that there's any truth to that? Like,
I don't know.
Like in the papers that we were reading earlier today
Right.
online on HBO's website, they were talking about, personal devices, like electronics devices that can like, mess with the fabric of
Right.
dimensional.
Yeah.
I was like, maybe, I don't know, like it seems.
Do you remember back when like cell phones were like very much becoming a big thing, and everyone was terrified that cell phones were going to give you brain cancer?
Yeah, well, that comes up with the watches later in the episode.
Yeah, so I think it's very much borrowing from that real life kind of paranoia in the way that it works. And I don't know,
But it's also, this is like weird sci-fi that we're getting into, so like there might be truth to it, and you can't write that off as just like paranoia or whatever.
Right. The reason that we get the shot of that car is because a routine traffic stop happens. This guy gets pulled over by a cop, and this is our first real glance at just how different things, at least in Tulsa. We should specify now that our barometer for like police and whatnot is happening like specifically in Tulsa, Oklahoma.
So we find out through the course of the episode that there was an event.
Right.
At some point, cops were attacked.
Right.
And
in Tulsa, specifically.
In Tulsa, and as a result, the cops wear these yellow masks, and then the detectives, who would normally be, plainclothes, have adopted their own kind of
superhero identities.
Unique identities, right? And so they are essentially the current generation of masked heroes, which is
Tulsa.
Really, really interesting.
Yeah, so we get the first shot of a cop in this universe, and he has his mask up, and he's pulling this guy over, and it's this very routine traffic stop, but he realizes immediately as he's going to get license and registration.
Yeah, out of glove box.
The guy has a Rorschach mask in his glove box,
right?
And it immediately triggers this a series of events.
We grow to understand over the course of the episode what the Rorschach mask means.
Right.
At this point, decades later, it's been co-opted and appropriated by these other groups, and we'll get into that.
Yeah.
What did you think? What did you make of the fact that he doesn't have control over his firearm without getting authorization?
That was the most interesting part of the scene to me, is the fact that cops in Tulsa are not allowed to carry firearms at all, into the point where he had to phone in, there's this device kind of in his dash in his car that's locking his gun. And he's trying to phone in to get authorization for it, and even when he gets authorization, it doesn't work.
Yeah,
he can't get it out.
I love that the guy that he talks to is we'll connect you with Panda. Oh no, don't! Damn it! He knows that Panda's gonna be weird about it,
right?
And we see a little bit more of him later on. But I've been trying to figure out what is the explanation for why.
I think that in this world you kind of see, just really subtle in very small glimpses, that things are very controlled, as far as nobody smokes in Watchmen. There's not a single scene of somebody smoking in this.
But there's also they also bust into people's trailers and kidnap them and then beat them up. So it's
right. So there's force. Maybe it's the force.
Yeah, maybe the cops are clearly under more strict guidelines than the detectives are, or I don't know. Clearly we're going to learn a lot more about all that stuff.
The system obviously is far from perfect, because it goes immediately off the rails when he can't get his gun out, and the cop sadly gets shot through the windshield.
It's the second cold open, and it was pretty shocking.
Yeah, it's very shocking.
We've now gone from one shocking scene to another incredibly shocking scene. Yeah. And at this point I was already hooked. I was this is something else. So then we meet Looking Glass, who I'm aware
I love Looking Glass.
For some reason is your favorite.
He's my favorite
character.
I don't know, I just think he's so interesting, because we get basically the aftermath of the shooting naturally has to be, and goes straight to the top. The commissioner of Tulsa's police has to kind of call in the detectives, and so Looking Glass is one of the detectives that gets called in. He's been in the trailers. He's got that cool mirror mask.
He definitely looks cool.
He looks so cool.
I like the way he talks too.
Yeah.
I like the teeth whistle. He's like a Looney Tunes.
He's got the really
Yosemite
thick
Sam or something.
Oklahoma drawl. But he's kind of our gateway into learning that, you know, like what we were just talking about, the fact that these detectives have adopted essentially like superhero identities for themselves. But it's also really interesting because, like Hooded Justice was kind of evoked with the silhouette of Bass Reeves in the beginning, they don't make any sort of buts about like using cues for Rorschach on Looking Glass.
Yeah, I definitely immediately got like down to the way that like the profile of how his face looks when he pulls the mask
and like
on.
he like rolls his mask up in the same way, and it's this whole thing. But we'll talk about all of that in a second because there's a scene where it makes it even more explicit that he is the like kind of Rorschach allegory for this version.
But then before that though, we go to the scene with the eggs and the cookies. But in that transition, we finally, I think it's like 18 minutes into this episode, we finally get the first sign
of like
that we're watching a Watchmen thing.
Right.
And it's a little glimpse of Dr. Manhattan on
Mars.
There's
like a news clip of like, oh, he's still up there.
I know, I love that the lower third on the news clip just says Dr. Manhattan on Mars. It's like, where did you think he would be?
He's still just there.
What's the news here?
Yeah, so he's been there, I mean, by my count, unless something that we don't know has happened, he's been there for 30 years.
Right, I mean, he
just
could
building sandcastles
hop
and destroying
around.
them. You know.
Okay, so we meet Angela, and she is the main character. So we're 20 minutes into this episode, and we finally meet
our
the
main character.
Which is so interesting. Like, the episode was kind of disorienting. Like, I wasn't sure what to focus on for huge chunks of it. And then the second time I watched it, I think I understood, you know, what they were, what I was meant to focus on a little bit better. But this scene where we meet Angela is like full of Watchmen stuff.
So much.
So
there's
I will let
so
you.
much world building.
I will let Meg take it.
Oh my gosh, there's so much world. It's maybe like a 4-minute scene, and there's the most details that we've ever gotten about like what this world looks like, just packed. She's in a classroom in career day, so she has her son like sitting in this like elementary school classroom, and she's explaining her job, which is she's a baker, and like rapid fire, you get a smiley face symbol in the egg.
Of course, yep.
So of course, you know, there's a whole big thing with, you know, smiley faces. It's the comedian's button. That's a Watchmen thing. And she goes through this line about how it's important that you separate
the yolks
from the whites of the eggs.
Or else the whites will
collapse.
Yeah, and I was like, oh, racism.
Yeah, symbolism.
Yeah.
But then you also learn like, in quick succession, you learn that Vietnam is now a state, which makes sense because in Watchmen world, Dr. Manhattan swooped in and ended Vietnam like immediately.
Right. Which is one of the iconic scenes from the original.
So Vietnam is a state. That's where Angela was born. She was born there a little bit before it became a state. So, you know, whatever. There's also a poster on the wall that's like 4 important presidents, which is Lincoln, Washington, Nixon and Robert Redford, who is the current president of the United States and has been the president for 30 years.
Still president.
There's also a poster that's like the anatomy of a squid, which you learn almost immediately after this that there's, you know, squid rains happen still.
Right,
so
squids
like,
just fall from the sky at random points. So that becomes, again, that's something that becomes, that it's like, why is there a poster about a squid? I guess it's a classroom. Right. But then it becomes
like very
more
apparent that it's not
the second
traditional
time you watch
squid.
it.
And then you also, a kid, like this kid kind of calls her out.
He's 10 years old. You wanted to punch him.
I know. I wanted to punch him. But there's this kid who calls Angela out because she's talking about her bakery. And he says, oh, did you pay for it with Redfordations? Which it took me a second to like put that together what it was because they don't actually explain it. But Robert Redford like basically enacted a reparations like law that actually would pay out money to people who were victims of racial violence, which is specifically poignant in Tulsa, where the Tulsa Massacre occurred.
It puts the massacre from the opening scene in context as well. And the first time that we learn some of the backstory about the White Night, which is when all the cops were attacked, which is what led to the mask and all that stuff.
So we learn about the White Night, which is, you know, she kind of over-explains for a elementary school career day.
But she explains the exact right amount for us, the audience.
Yeah, for us, it's great. But for, you know, like 8-year-old kids talking about how she was shot and how the doctors had to, like, open up her insides to, like, take the bullets out. And the teacher's like, ooh. But that's the White Night, and that's like the single most important, I would argue, like expository moment in the episode.
I'm guessing we're going to learn a lot more about that.
Yes.
So then let's talk about the squid rain.
So as they leave the elementary school is where we actually learn why there was an anatomy of the squid poster.
And this was the moment when I realized, or when I remembered, or I had to remind myself that this is a sequel to the comics.
Right.
Not to the film, because the entire ending of the
movie has a completely different ending.
Right.
No squids allowed in the movie at all. So this is stepping off from the comics ending.
Right, where the
in which,
giant, Ozymandias drops the giant tentacle monster on New York.
Right.
And apparently ever since then, squids have been periodically raining from the sky.
Right.
And it's such a regular occurrence that not only do the kids learn about it in school,
right.
but they have, the
like an alarm
like a storm warning, like a tornado warning. Sorry, this is my motion for like the sirens are.
Yeah, they're going. It's like an air raid siren.
Yes, that's what I was looking for.
Yeah, so like these squids rain down for like 2 seconds. Like it's not a long or like devastating attack that happens. Like it's just little baby squids. They
Right,
just
it's
fall
pretty
down.
harmless. Like I forget the kid's name, but he's like, it smells, and she's like, well, at least your nose still works.
Yeah, it smells, and like the squids all dissolve when they hit. Like they don't
really
last.
Weird.
It's very weird.
Although they were in the front yard in the next scene.
I think they were spraying off the
up.
gunk because I didn't see any squid.
That might be it.
Like it's like slimy. It's really gross.
I wanted to point out the weird Bob Marley cover.
Yeah, it's every little thing's gonna be all right.
Right, but it's like a kid,
sung by
like
kids.
a child singing it.
Yeah.
Very upsetting.
I guess it's because they're baby squids.
I don't know
so
if it was supposed to be upsetting to me. But
I don't know.
I
It's a
like
little
it.
uncomfortable.
So there's a little nod to Ozymandias. Speaking of Ozymandias, there's a little nod to him right after that.
Right, like immediately after that, it's just like I said, rapid fire world building just happens immediately after this. So like we get a clip of a person holding a newspaper that just says like Veidt dead or Veidt presumed
right, which
dead.
is Ozymandias' real name,
Adrian
of course.
Veidt. And so apparently in this last like 30 years, he just kind of disappeared, or something happened that people have not been able to ascertain whether or not he's actually around, or like I don't know what's going on.
And now he's apparently dead.
Yeah, and so now apparently everyone just has decided that.
But he's not.
Dead,
but we'll find out more about that later. So I wanted to point out to you the old man asking.
Yeah, he's the one holding the paper.
Yes, I wanted to point out to you. Did you clock who he was at that point?
No.
I didn't either.
I didn't either.
You think I can lift 200 pounds?
Sure you could.
But when he asks her if she thinks that he could lift 200 pounds, it jumps out at you, but then there's so many things happening in this episode,
right?
You forget about it,
yeah,
of course.
He's
but then that makes
weird
more
old
sense.
Man that like, I was just like, oh, whatever. There's
it
so
makes
much
sense
weird...
at the end, of course, because apparently he lifted Judd up and hanged him from a tree.
We haven't gotten there yet.
We gave the spoiler warning.
It's
It's fine.
In that scene that we see the old man and he asks her that weird question, we also get to meet Angela's real identity, I guess is what you would say, that she's not.
Right.
In fact, she's not opening a bakery, obviously.
Well, maybe she is eventually.
I mean, I guess, but
you gotta have a believable cover.
right. So her actual day job, because she's still a cop. She has not quit the force. Even
She
after
lied to those children.
She lied to a bunch of kids and
God.
told them that she quit after the White Knight, and now she's a detective, and she goes by the name Sister Knight. And her bakery is actually secretly her like bat cave, which is really cool.
I thought it was awesome.
And it's got that like beautiful like Trent Reznor, Atticus Ross score. She's like suiting up, and it's like it's a very
The
very
score
cool
is so
moment.
good. Did we see her punch in her code here
yeah,
as well?
So her like secret like locker of stuff is behind a locked door that has a 1985.
Yeah, the code is 1985.
Yeah, which it's a nod to the comics, which is fun. And so she becomes Sister Knight. She storms in to a trailer park, which is a Nixon-themed trailer park, I should say, specify like critically.
It sure was.
Yeah, and so she storms in and then goes to the police station, which is where we get another like critical exposition.
Yeah, we get
moment.
introduced to the 7th Cavalry. Finally, and it's cavalry with a K because I believe it is meant to evoke the Ku Klux Klan.
Yes, absolutely.
And so that's very pointed, obviously. But yeah, they have appropriated the image of Rorschach, who of course dies at the end of the comics, but not before writing his manifesto.
Right. So he has his journals, which, if you remember at the very end of the comics, it's left kind of ambiguous whether or not like he's been writing this journal this whole time. And he sends it to the New Frontiersman, which is a newspaper that's like very much like the Fox News of the Watchmen universe. Like it's this very like heavily biased.
We're gonna get some comments about this.
Yeah,
Go ahead though, keep going.
But it's a very like, it's known kind of in universe as this like conspiracy rag, right? Like, and so he sends it to them, and it's the last page of the comic is like an editorial assistant not knowing whether or not he should publish it or like whether he should like look at it even. And so we didn't know when the graphic novel ended whether or not this story would be made public at all.
Right, but apparently it was, and
It
now
super was.
a white supremacist militia
Right.
has adopted it as their
Like, yeah,
dogma.
yeah, so that's like the whole, you know, the whole thing of like all the misogyny and like the weird like crypto racism that's all
And
in.
they have their Rorschach masks, although I have to say their masks are a lot less cool than
yeah,
Rorschach's
they're
actual
not
mask.
actual. They're like
They're
ski
just like,
masks
yeah, they're just
with
like
the
cotton
paint on them.
and the eye holes cut
Yeah,
out. But
so-
they do, and we will whisper, no. Like
Yeah,
they do all the Rorschach quotes,
all of it.
the TikTok stuff.
Yeah. It's,
And it's like, it's troubling because when I first read Watchmen, Rorschach is the first character that you meet in the books.
He's
and-
ostensibly the protagonist.
Exactly, yeah.
Right.
And so, I don't know, it feels like a commentary on the way that character has aged. Like, I think if I went back and read Watchmen now in 2019,
Right.
I probably would not identify with him quite so
Right.
much. Like, he's kind of an asshole.
Right. He's he's a little unstable.
Yeah.
Like,
So
a
I
little
question,
unstable.
have the 7th Cavalry reappropriated his message and twisted it? Or did his message always suck? And if I went back and read it now, would I view the whole thing in a different light?
Right. I think that's the question you're kind of supposed to be asking, because we don't know based on the context that we were given from the PDpedia, which has a whole like PDF for Rorschach's journal specifically.
Yeah, go read that for sure.
Yeah, it's really, really interesting, but there's like the public perception of the Rorschach journal that was published is like, we don't know whether or not it's legit. We don't know if it's what he actually wrote. We don't know if it was a hoax, like if it was just the editors kind of using this as a kind of catch-all for something that they're writing. So I think you're not supposed to actually understand whether or not the version of the journal that's been published in this world is what we read in the comic, or if it's something else entirely.
Jeez.
Yeah, so it's a lot. Like, there's a lot going on here.
We'll probably find out.
Yeah, so like we get to see them in like their like terrorist video, and like the cops all decide that like they're under immediate threat, so they get firearms authorized.
Yeah, to Panda's objections.
Yeah,
I love Panda. I
Panda's
want
weird, yeah.
to see more Panda.
He's like the office administrator, I guess is what
Yeah.
you call him, but he wears like a mascot
He seems
head.
like the Farva of this
Yeah.
show. Like he's been benched. He probably like attacked some poor fast food worker over the size of a cola
something.
at some point.
But we get like Judd kind of ends this meeting with Quis Custodes
Yes.
Ipsos Custodium, which is the Latin version.
Did you just do that from memory?
Yeah. The
Very
Latin phrase of who watches the Watchmen.
And then their response is Nos Custodimus. I had to read
Nos
it.
Custodimus.
Nos Custodimus.
Which
I took
is-
Latin in high school.
Yeah, I didn't take Latin, but I
retained
remembered this.
nothing.
But that means like we do or we uphold.
Yeah,
So,
I was
like,
really confused about that back and forth until
Yeah.
I rewatched it with subtitles on.
Right.
It's another little
It's just a little nod.
interesting detail. There's a couple of things in Judd's office that were fun. There's the owl mug,
It's really
which
cute,
relates
yeah.
to Night Owl, of course.
Yeah. And then on Judd's desk, he's actually got a copy of Under the Hood, which is Hollis Mason's autobiography. So if you've read,
Oh, yeah.
the Watchmen comic, every issue comes with a backup, and the most prominent backup story is like a prose glimpse at this book called Under the Hood, which is
I totally
Hollis
forgot
Mason,
about
like basically recounting his time with the Minutemen, who were the original like 1940s heroes. And so that kind of frames a lot of like the perception of those characters, because they're not really in the comics at all, because a lot of them are dead.
Right,
or
it's all
crazy
backstory, yeah.
So that's the backstory of them. So he's got a copy sitting on his desk, which is a lot of fun, because it's, like he's up in pop culture, I guess.
Yeah.
It's an old book, so he's, he's
Speaking of fun, let's talk about
Yeah.
that pod.
Oh.
The Interrogation Pod, which aesthetically I think is like maybe the coolest thing.
Oh, it's so cool.
Definitely the coolest thing in the episode. This interrogation thing that Looking Glass does to the guy,
Yeah.
who Angela went and grabbed from the trailer park. I'm not sure if that would really work, but he seems to also be doing.
It's very weird.
Yeah.
Like Looking Glass, as we understand, is like everybody, like every superhero except for Dr. Manhattan in the Watchmen world is just a person.
Right, they don't
There's
have any.
no
I mean,
superpowers.
Ozymandias is super smart,
Right.
or
Yeah.
whatever.
Like you can be really
but
smart and you can be really strong, but you don't actually have like superpowers.
not to supernatural levels,
Right.
though. So I'm not
So-
sure how Looking Glass is.
Right.
He seems to be doing this thing like The Expanse does it,
Mm-hmm.
where they pop this pill and then their pupils dilate and they can sense the smallest changes in people's
Like he's
demeanors
very
and
much,
expressions.
Like he sits in this chair across from this guy, and they're surrounded by like screens that he's just playing like random images on, which is another way.
And the
that
music
we learn,
is banging right here too. It's so good.
So he's reading this guy's like micro expressions as he's like flashing, like there's an image of Mount Rushmore and it has Nixon carved in it, world building,
Right.
and like there's an alternate like Confederate flag, and so it's the Confederate flag with the like "Don't tread on me" snake in it, and like there's pictures of actual Rorschach tests.
And then the stuff reflecting off of Looking Glass's mirror, his mirrored face as well, looks like Rorschach images.
Right. They could not be less subtle if they tried.
I don't understand why they're associating Looking Glass so much with Rorschach if we're meant to believe that Rorschach's journals inspired the bad guys of this show.
Right, and as far as we can tell,
why are we associating Looking Glass so much with Rorschach? Because it makes me think that Looking Glass is a bad guy.
Yeah, but he's a good person as far as we've been able to tell, which is so weird.
A lot of stuff going on here.
Interesting. So yeah, it's arguably it's about halfway through the episode. It's my favorite scene in the whole thing. It's so cool.
This is also the point though, because up until this point, the cops have been positioned as good guys and the 7th Cavalry has been depicted as bad guys. And, Angela literally kidnapped a guy.
Right.
And,
straight up, just like...
he's asking for his lure and they're like, we don't have to do that for terrorists. And he's like, I was just
like,
sitting in my trailer.
Nothing,
And she turns out to be right, but I was like, I don't know about these methods. This seems like a lot.
It's very much like the Watchmen kind of way is not having any clear lines delineated between like good and bad, right?
Yes.
And so up to this point, we've had very clear lines, dividing the good and bad, and this is where everything starts to get real gray and very very uncomfortable ways.
Right, and it if you think about the ending of the episode in that context, there's a lot to unpack there.
Right. We learn that, despite their horrifying methods, that they get good intel from...
Right, that's the other thing, is that it works.
Yeah, it completely works. So they send the detectives, all get sent to a 7th Cavalry, compound, where we learn that they're, harvesting watch parts, literal watch parts.
There's the conversation later between Angela and Judd where they talk about, and this also ties into the Peteypedia stuff that we were talking about earlier, the technology, where all of these electronics have been banned for allegedly making people sick.
Right.
And so they're speculating that the 7th Cavalry is planning to do something with all these watch parts.
Right. Maybe if they harvest enough watch parts, they'll be able to open a portal for another squid or something like.
I have no idea, but I'm sure it'll get explained later.
Yeah, it's just a very weird detail. So of course, there's a big, the big action set piece of the episode is this.
I felt very bad for all these cows here.
Yeah, these cows kind of get mowed down. It's gruesome.
Yikes.
But so we get the actual interior view of what a 7th Cavalry compound looks like, and they're all still wearing their masks, and it's very uncomfortable and weird. There's some iconography of the Minutemen. There's a poster on the wall that has Dollar Bill, who was one of the original Minutemen, who, if you're a big Watchmen nerd, you'll remember from Under the Hood that Dollar Bill was one of the ones. He was very much like the comedian. He was the super intolerant. He was funded by a bank.
So that explains that
poster.
So
he has a very racist poster of Dollar Bill kicking a black kid out of a bank or whatever, being keep the riffraff out.
Holy
it's really ugh. So of course they're not only idolizing Rorschach, they're idolizing other parts of the Minutemen.
They are equal opportunity when it comes to racist superheroes.
Yes, 100%. So we learn, we get to see the police are still using the owl ships, which is fun.
That was such a good reveal.
Yeah, it was very cool.
When they're they have a plane, and then boom, out of the clouds.
Yeah.
I was it felt like a moment from Zack Snyder's movie, but in
did.
a good way.
Yeah.
Because there are parts of that movie that I still think are really cool. And I thought that was so. Why would they have this though?
I know, that's a really good question. That's something that I'm wondering is how did Dan Dreiberg and Hollis Mason, who perfected these weird ships, did they then just hand the copyrights over?
Did they sell them?
I don't know.
Are we gonna find out that the former Night Owl is just some Silicon Valley rich guy now?
Why not? He's
right?
Yeah, he's 70 years old and just raking it in.
Judging by the way this episode was though, I will be surprised if we don't get an explanation. Right. It doesn't seem to be throwing these things in haphazardly.
Absolutely nothing. I got the impression watching this that absolutely nothing that shows up on screen is incidental.
Right.
Absolutely nothing.
Okay, let's talk about this weird old man and his servants that are maybe robots or something.
I don't know.
If I didn't know what was going on here, I would have no idea who this guy is.
Right.
But
yeah, like you can basically assume, and they treat him kind of like he's Voldemort. Like they do not speak his name, but you can very much assume when this man is, it's Jeremy Irons, literally rides a horse into frame. And it's Ozymandias.
Yeah, it's Adrian
like
Veidt.
A 70-year-old man.
What do you think is the strategy behind like not naming him though, and
I
not
don't know.
having giving the audience anything to grab onto?
Even in like promotional material, like they're playing really coy with it. Like they know that everyone has ascertained that Jeremy Irons is playing Veidt, but they're not. They like refuse to name him.
Right. So I guess technically it could not be.
Right. Like maybe that's the card turn is like, oh, gotcha.
Right.
You
It's
thought.
like a meta twist
Yeah.
involving the casting or whatever, but like everything points to this being Ozymandias.
And he's in the weird, like up until this point we've been in Tulsa. Like strictly have been in Tulsa.
Where is this castle?
There's like, he's in like Ireland
It's
maybe?
so strange.
Or
And he
Scotland,
has these
perhaps?
servants, and the guy hands him a horseshoe instead of a knife,
he's
and
like
then he
a
takes one bite of
glitching,
cake.
like-
At some point he's naked, and he wrote a play called The Watchmaker's Son, which I wanted to talk about real quick.
Right.
Because John Osterman,
Yes,
that Dr.
that's Dr.
Manhattan's
Manhattan.
real name is John Osterman, and his father was a watchmaker.
Right.
So we can assume that
Yeah.
Ozymandias is sitting around in his castle with his weird robot servants writing plays about
Dr. Manhattan.
Dr. Manhattan.
And like,
And this is all we get in this episode. I have
Yeah.
no idea what the hell is going on
literally
here.
no idea. Like it's very surreal. It almost like very abruptly pivots like a Wes Anderson movie.
Yeah.
Like it feels like it's got that like sort of like artifice.
That's really good, yeah.
To it. Yeah, like it doesn't feel like it belongs in the rest of the episode at all. But it's still really interesting. Like I have no idea. Like
Yeah.
and the way the servants all call him master, and they all kind of conduct themselves as if they're like kind of glitching.
Yeah.
But like there's no indication that they're robots. Like you don't actually see any of them.
No,
like,
that was I
Yeah.
mean, like knowing, just like being firmly like immersed into the idea
Right.
that this is now a weird sci-fi show,
Yeah.
like in the vein of like Maniac on
Yes.
Netflix last year, which we loved a lot. I'm thinking about it that way, and I'm like,
Yeah.
are they robots? Like,
They're
you know what I
like
mean?
Clones
yeah.
or robots or something is happening. So I mean, and he also, the Watchmaker's Son, you don't get a property called Watchmen with like haphazard references to watchmakers. It just does not happen. Like you can't accidentally put that in. So it's
Right.
clearly.
There's a lot of stuff going on with
yeah.
clocks and watches and
Right.
electronics, and
So
it'll
I
all
mean,
mean
yeah,
something.
we don't know.
Okay, so there's also this like show within the show
Right.
happening, the American Hero story,
Right.
and I am guessing you have a little bit more context
I do.
for that, because I
I
didn't
do.
really understand what was.
So it's American
going on.
Hero Story : Minutemen, which is very much like in the vein of American Crime Story : Versace or whatever.
Sure.
Yeah. So it's a story within the story about the original Minutemen, who, if you remember from the graphic novel, were the team from the 40s. So there was Captain Metropolis and Hooded Justice, who we've talked about a little bit. Dollar Bill, who I also talked about. Comedian, who is a key player in the actual...
Right, so he was one of like the members that bridged the gap between the
Right,
40s and
yeah.
then the version that the team that the Watchmen comics
Exactly.
are actually about.
So yeah, there's Comedian, who was one of them. Night Owl, who was also one of them. He started as Hollis Mason, then passed the mantle to Dan, who is the Night Owl in the graphic novel. There is Silk Spectre, who was
Same thing.
Sally, and then passed the mantle to Lori. They were mother and daughter. There was Mothman, who went insane, was institutionalized very tragically. And then not in the clip, in the show at least, there was another member named Silhouette who was murdered. I don't know if they're just not going to use her in the show at all or whatever, but...
Do you think that there is a larger... Do you think that this show within the show is going to be treated like the Black Freighter stuff from the comics and be a through line throughout the entire...
I really hope so, because I think it works really well to give context, especially to the way that the alt history has kind of internalized the like modern myths of the superhero. So you can, knowing just what you know, if you're familiar with how the Minutemen came together, how they went down from the graphic novel, seeing how it's like theatrically done in, the 2019 version of Watchmen history is
Right.
like, whoa, none of this is right.
Things get truncated
Right.
and mythologized.
Right.
And then I think in the context of the way the episode opened with a, disgusting chapter of history
Yeah.
that a lot of people don't know about at all.
Right.
I think there's a lot of interesting things going on in the
Exactly.
show, like with regards to history and how we
Yeah.
view the events of the past now.
Right, yeah. So the Minutemen stuff is all very, like, they'd seeded a couple times before you actually see the intro of the episode.
Right, there's like the blimp.
Yeah, so like
earlier
there's
on.
like a blimp and there's people like with signs, you know, twirling and whatnot, and it's like the most important television event of the year or whatever.
Of the millennium. Or
yeah, something like that. So like I get the impression that this is going to be something that is going to keep cropping up, and you want to pay attention to it.
So then finally the episode ends with the murder by the old man of the other old man, Judd.
Old man on old man crimes.
It turns out he could lift 200 pounds, I
Sure
guess,
enough.
because he kills that guy dead. And we have so many questions about this.
There's literally no context for it
There's
at all.
zero
Like,
information besides that the old man in the wheelchair was the little boy from the beginning.
Right.
Which puts him, I think, over 100 years old.
Absolutely, like 100
the dude is
plus.
ancient.
Yeah, and somehow managed to string up the very able-bodied, like 60-year-old police commissioner.
Yeah, he's not that old.
Like,
So, like, is there somebody helping him? Is this related to the 7th Cavalry, or is this
Right.
something else?
yeah, like
I would find it hard to believe that that guy is a white supremacist.
Right, yeah, like there's no indication that these events are all related, but you're very much meant to believe that they are just from the way that the episode kind of works,
Yeah.
right? Like you're supposed to be conflating all of these things.
I don't know what's going on.
Yeah,
but
I
I'm
have
intrigued.
no idea. And so there's, of course, the final shot is very poignant. It's the sheriff's badge is laying on the ground, and the blood splatter
Right.
drips down in the doomsday clock position, like the comedian's button, the famous blood splatter, which is, you know, in Watchmen context has always been meant to indicate, you know, like something bad is happening. Something is ticking down, but to what? The final song is also to give you some context for the episode title, which seems very random, like it's summertime and we're running out of ice. It's Poor Judd is Dead, which is also from the musical Oklahoma.
Right,
Get
there
it?
was a
Because
bit
we're in
about-
Oklahoma.
And there was the bit about the musical
Right.
earlier.
Right, so, but it's a lyric from that song, which, I mean, Judd is the character that died, so real on the nose. Extremely on the nose here.
So that's it for us, and we're going to be back next week breaking down episode 2, of course. Let us know what you thought of the episode in the comments below. Do you have any predictions? Do you have any theories for what's going to happen next? Did we miss anything?
Yeah. Let us know. We'll be back next week. Bleh, 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 bleh.